Have you ever heard the story of the blind man and the elephant? A group of blind men were walking and they came upon an elephant. None of the men had ever encountered an elephant before, and the only way they could understand the elephant was by touching it. The first man touched its trunk and said, "It's a thick snake." Another man touched its ear and said, "It's like a fan." Another man felt its leg and said, "An elephant is a pillar like a tree trunk." One of the blind men walked to its side and said, "This is not an animal, it's a wall." The fifth man felt its tail and thought it was a rope. The last man felt its tusk and stated, "An elephant is hard and smooth like a spear." This familiar parable illustrates the difference between knowledge, perception, and facts. The elephant is a fact, it's a real thing, but the way each of these men perceive the elephant affect their knowledge of what an elephant was. Therefore, each of these men who encountered the same thing and gained their knowledge the same way ended up knowing something completely different. This parable has been used to illustrate many concepts. It can be used to illustrate that people today have a huge amount of knowledge available to them, but they can look at some of the same information sources and come up with completely different conclusions. This is understandable because each person filters the information they obtain through their own personal bias, opinions, background, and viewpoint. Having all this information at our fingertips should be a benefit, but it often causes stress and anxiety. This anxiety about too much information has led to the term information overload, which Wikipedia also calls infobesity and infoxication. Information anxiety can lead to indecision or the inability to separate truth from untruth. Because all the information we get comes from people who have their own point of view, it makes it very difficult to decide what information to trust. This can overwhelm us when we're researching a topic. The conflict we feel when we're trying to assimilate a lot of data that could be contradictory is called cognitive dissonance. Let's see what cognitive dissonance is and how it can affect us.
As we've seen, spotting bias in the news media is a challenge. A bigger challenge, however, is to identify your own biases. For better and worse, we are the products of our own upbringings, experiences, friendships, and associations. We all have built-in prejudices and predispositions. In fact, those biases can act as a barrier between your brain and the reliable information you need to make sound decisions. That barrier is what a social psychologist named Leon Festinger called cognitive dissonance. He defined cognitive dissonance as follows: the mental stress or discomfort experienced by an individual who holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values at the same time, or is confronted by new information that conflicts with existing beliefs, ideas, or values. That conflict can cause anxiety, stress, even actual pain. Now listen to these two sounds. Which one is music to your ears? Which one would you prefer to avoid because it's unpleasant to listen to? The first sound is harmony. The second, disharmony, dissonance. Our response to unpleasant, dissonant sounds is similar to our response to information that conflicts with our existing beliefs, ideas, or values. Your brain takes steps to avoid the stress caused by dissonance because your brain cares more about harmony than what, in fact, may be the truth. Your brain has a way to compensate for this. It copes with the unpleasant sensation of dissonance in a number of ways. The first coping mechanism is called selective distortion and retention. We tend to distort or forget incoming information that contradicts our points of view. Think about someone who loves ice cream. This could be you. She hears a radio report in which doctors warn against consuming too much ice cream because of its fat content. It's likely that the news report will not sink into her brain. What will? That commercial for ice cream that plays 2 minutes later. We are more likely to accept and retain information that conforms to our deeply held beliefs and desires. Information that does not conform is more likely to be disregarded or distorted so that we can carry on without disruptions to our mental harmony. The brain's second coping mechanism goes even a bit further. It's called source amnesia. That's when you hold on to a lot of the information you learn, but over time, separate the information from its source. If the information matches your existing beliefs, you're more likely to attribute it to a credible source. Imagine that you have picked a side in a fierce political debate. The politician you support has paid for an ad that claims that 10 years ago, his opponent cheated on his taxes. You're sure to remember the assertion of tax cheating. You want the charge to be true. So you will attribute this information to a straight-shooting news outlet rather than an obviously partisan political ad. The opposite is also true. Disagree with information that comes from a very reliable source? Sooner or later, you're likely to connect it to a disreputable source. The third is confirmation bias. This describes the tendency to seek out information that confirms your point of view. One of the ironies of our age is that we have an endless amount of information at our fingertips, and yet it's easier than ever to customize the news we consume, to shut out information that challenges our beliefs. The goal then is to fight your natural instincts, hardwired into your brain, to overcome cognitive dissonance by seeking out information that challenges your points of view. The first step is to become aware of your own biases.
The human brain has many coping techniques and mechanisms for processing information. We need these mechanisms so we don't get overwhelmed by all the information around us, and so we can process that information and make decisions. We do this not only with data we read, but with first-hand information. To illustrate why we need to take in information selectively, imagine that we're at a party with 20 of our closest friends. Now imagine that we can hear every conversation in the room equally. This could be great. We could learn a lot about every person in the room, but how can we make sense of everything that is being said by 20 people simultaneously? How can we follow all of these conversations? We can't. So our brain picks and chooses what it thinks is important. When we're at a party, we focus on what one person is saying at a time, usually the person in front of us. But then we think we hear our name and our attention shifts to the conversation going on behind us, and we tune out the person we were talking to. We have to be selective if we want to understand even a little bit of what's being discussed. This same process of filtering applies to the information we look up online. When we type something into a search engine, we receive a huge dump of everything the internet has on that subject. Although we'd like to think we could search through the internet for everything that applies to our subject, we really don't want all that information. We wouldn't be able to make sense of it. Search engines make assumptions about what information we'd find important and give it to us based on those assumptions. The first thing we look at should be the most relevant information on that subject. Everything humans learn and research comes from individual bias. It's a function of being human. The term bias often has a negative connotation, but it's really just a part of being human, like hunger and thirst. For us to get the best information and make the best decisions, we need to acknowledge that everyone, researchers, reporters, and students, have a personal bias. We need to use that knowledge to evaluate the information that we obtain. There were 3 coping methods mentioned that people use to deal with the stress of cognitive dissonance. The first was selective distortion and retention. This means that humans tend to hear things in a way that reinforces what they already believe and conveniently immediately forget anything that contradicts those beliefs. You've probably experienced this when talking to a friend. You express an opposite point of view and they say, "Yeah, that's what I was talking about." They only hear what they want to hear, the part that reinforces their opinion. The second was source amnesia. We learn new information and discard its source or where we got it like it's not important. Someone may ask us where we got our information, and all we can remember was it was in the newspaper. But it's important to know if we got the information from a gossip magazine or a major news source. The source of the information matters. We will usually assume that it's from a reliable source if it agrees with our own opinions, and that it's from an unreliable source if it contradicts us. The third coping mechanism is called confirmation bias. This is a very powerful bias, and it affects how we research information and what we take in. Basically, we tend to look for information that goes along with what we already know or believe. When we get a page of search results, we click on the items that go along with what we think we already know. This can affect our ability to get factual information. We can't spend every minute carefully evaluating information, or we wouldn't be able to do anything. So our minds have shortcuts in order for us to make decisions. Those mental shortcuts are called heuristics. Let's see what heuristics are and how they can affect our ability to take in information and make decisions.
Every day you make decisions and judgments. Sometimes you're able to think about them carefully, but other times you make them on the fly using little information. This is where heuristics come in. Heuristics are straightforward rules of thumb that we develop based on our past experiences. They're cognitive tools that help us make quick decisions or judgments. Life would be exhausting if we had to deliberate over every one of the hundreds of choices we make every day. So instead, we use our heuristics as shortcuts to make judgments about the world around us. For example, rather than spending time deciding what to wear every day, you might have some default outfits. Or when faced with a lunch menu with too many options, you may opt for what you've enjoyed in the past. Heuristics aren't about making the perfect decision or judgment, just about making one quickly. Heuristics play a role in our reasoning about the broader world, too. As an example, consider the rate of violence in the world over the past century. Is the world more or less violent in the past 20 years than previously? Heuristic reasoning might lead us to think that the world is more violent today than it has been in the past. Every day, we're confronted with images of tragedy in the news and on social media. We might reasonably assume that the world is more violent today than ever before using what's called an availability heuristic. That is, examples of violence that are so readily available, we just naturally assume the world is more violent today. But in fact, the world is more peaceful today than ever before in human history. We may hear a lot about violent events, but in terms of raw numbers, fewer people die today at the hands of other human beings than ever before. So that heuristic about how violent the world is incorrect. In fact, a slew of other heuristics can easily lead us to mistaken conclusions. And it doesn't matter how smart or well-educated you are. Anyone can place too much trust in the mental shortcuts they use to make sense of the world. Take this example. Let's say a person tests positive for a rare disease, one that only 1 in 1,000 people have. What is the likelihood that he actually has the disease? Most of us would say the likelihood is very high based on the test results alone. But what if the results were inaccurate 10% of the time? If the false positive rate is 10%, a common number in medical tests, then it is highly unlikely our patient has the disease. In fact, based on the prevalence of the disease and the test result, we can be 99% sure he doesn't have the disease. This is because the odds of getting a false positive result, 1 in 10, are much higher than the odds of actually having the disease, 1 in 1,000. But in multiple studies, physicians routinely get this wrong, overestimating the likelihood that their patient actually has the disease. Psychologists call this the representativeness heuristic. People assume an individual case is more representative than it actually is. Our political views can especially suffer from an over-reliance on heuristics. Just consider how we deal with political issues. We'll often let our political identities, and our heuristics about how right we think they are, stand in lieu of important details and information we need to have an informed viewpoint. Because our heuristics can so easily lead us to faulty conclusions, it's important to be humble about our views. In light of our fallibility, we have to do something that doesn't come easy. We must recognize that the world is an uncertain place, and that our judgments about it are often wrong. We ought to listen to opinions we may initially consider wrong or even offensive. Our intuitions are useful, even necessary when it comes to making quick judgments about the world, but that doesn't mean they're correct. Recognizing the flawed nature of your thinking is a bold first step to challenging it.
So heuristics are unconscious decision-making tools that we use all the time. They help us avoid wasting time deliberating about every decision. One of these shortcuts is called availability. That means we tend to go along with whatever information is freely and easily available. That information becomes fact. Another tool is called representativeness. We hear that someone got sick after drinking tap water and then assume that one case represents all cases of people who drink tap water. So from then on, we avoid drinking tap water because we assume that it will make us sick like it did with that one person. We need these mental processes and shortcuts so we can function and make simple decisions, but when making major decisions or researching new information, you need to slow down and think more deliberately. This involves developing critical thinking skills. Let's see what critical thinking is.
Critical thinking is a term that gets thrown around a lot. You've probably heard it used often throughout the years, whether it was in school, at work, or in everyday conversation. But when you stop to think about it, just what exactly is critical thinking? And how do you do it? Simply put, it's the act of deliberately analyzing information so that you can make better judgments and decisions. It involves using things like logic, reasoning, and creativity to draw conclusions and generally understand things better. This may sound like a pretty broad definition, and that's because critical thinking is a broad skill that can be applied to so many different situations. You can use it to prepare for a job interview, manage your time better, make decisions about purchasing things, and so much more. Now, as humans, we are constantly thinking. It's something we can't turn off. But not all of it is critical thinking. No one thinks critically 100% of the time. That would be pretty exhausting. Instead, it's an intentional process, something that we consciously use when we're presented with difficult problems or important decisions. In order to become a better critical thinker, it's important to ask questions when you're presented with a problem or a decision before jumping to any conclusions. You can start with simple ones like, what do I currently know? And how do I know this? These can help to give you a better idea of what you're working with, and in some cases, simplify more complex issues. Let's take a look at how we can use critical thinking to evaluate online information. Say a friend of yours posts a news article on social media and you're drawn to its headline. If you were to use your everyday automatic thinking, you might accept it as fact and move on. But if you were thinking critically, you would first analyze the available information and ask some questions. What's the source of this article? Is the headline potentially misleading? What are my friend's general beliefs, and do they inform why they might have shared this? After analyzing all of this information, you can draw a conclusion about whether you think the article is trustworthy. Critical thinking has a wide range of applications in the real world. It can help you to make better decisions, become more hireable, and generally help you to better understand the world around you.
GCF Global, creating opportunities for a better life.
It's important to ask questions about what we already know before researching more information on a topic. As we do so, we can think about our own personal biases and point of view. Ask questions like, what will we do if the information we learn contradicts what we already know or believe? What kind of evidence would we require to change our thinking on this subject? What information sources can we use to make sure we can research all sides of a topic? Let's look at 5 tools we can use to help us develop critical thinking skills.
Every day, a sea of decisions stretches before us. Some are small and unimportant, but others have a larger impact on our lives. For example, which politician should I vote for? Should I try the latest diet craze? Or will email make me a millionaire? We're bombarded with so many decisions that it's impossible to make a perfect choice every time. But there are many ways to improve our chances, and one particularly effective technique is critical thinking. This is a way of approaching a question that allows us to carefully deconstruct a situation, reveal its hidden issues, such as bias and manipulation, and make the best decision. If the critical part sounds negative, that's because, in a way, it is. Rather than choosing an answer because it feels right, a person who uses critical thinking subjects all available options to scrutiny and skepticism. Using the tools at their disposal, they'll eliminate everything but the most useful and reliable information. There are many different ways of approaching critical thinking, but here's one 5-step process that may help you solve any number of problems. 1. Formulate your question. In other words, know what you're looking for. This isn't always as straightforward as it sounds. For example, if you're deciding whether to try out the newest diet craze, your reasons for doing so may be obscured by other factors, like claims that you'll see results in just 2 weeks. But if you approach the situation with a clear view of what you're actually trying to accomplish by dieting, whether that's weight loss, better nutrition, or having more energy, that'll equip you to sift through this information critically, find what you're looking for, and decide whether the new fad really suits your needs. 2. Gather your information. There's lots of it out there, so having a clear idea of your question will help you determine what's relevant. If you're trying to decide on a diet to improve your nutrition, you may ask an expert for their advice or seek other people's testimonies. Information gathering helps you weigh different options, moving you closer to a decision that meets your goal. 3. Apply the information, something you do by asking critical questions. Facing a decision, ask yourself, what concepts are at work? What assumptions exist? Is my interpretation of the information logically sound? For example, in an email that promises you millions, you should consider, what is shaping my approach to this situation? Do I assume the sender is telling the truth? Based on the evidence, is it logical to assume I'll win any money? 4. Consider the implications. Imagine it's election time, and you've selected a political candidate based on their promise to make it cheaper for drivers to fill up on gas. At first glance, that seems great. But what about the long-term environmental effects? If gasoline use is less restricted by cost, this could also cause a huge surge in air pollution, an unintended consequence that's important to think about. 5. Explore other points of view. Ask yourself why so many people are drawn to the policies of the opposing political candidate. Even if you disagree with everything that candidate says, exploring the full spectrum of viewpoints might explain why some policies that don't seem valid to you appeal to others. This will allow you to explore alternatives, evaluate your own choices, and ultimately help you make more informed decisions. This 5-step process is just one tool, and it certainly won't eradicate difficult decisions from our lives, but it can help us increase the number of positive choices we make. Critical thinking can give us the tools to sift through a sea of information and find what we're looking for. And if enough of us use it, it has the power to make the world a more reasonable place.
The 5 steps suggested were 1. Formulate the question, narrow down what you're trying to find or learn. What are you looking for? This can also help us avoid being biased in our search. We can also decide what we do not want to look for, like information that merely confirms what we already think. 2. Gather information. Only focus on information that's relevant to our subject. 3. Apply the information. See how it applies to what we're researching. 4. Consider the implications. This means consider the big picture. How does the information we find relate to other facts or information on that topic? Does it make sense when we think about the big picture? 5. Explore other points of view. Look for opposing points of view and compare them to the subject to make sure we don't miss important information. As we do research, we want to make sure that we're gaining facts and not just opinions. The elephant in our opening story is a fact, but each man reported their own personal opinion. If we were researching information on elephants and relied on their eyewitness testimony, we would obtain incorrect information. But how do we know what constitutes a fact and what's an opinion? Let's learn how we can distinguish facts from opinions.
If I say it's 30 degrees Celsius outside, you can verify the information. All you need is a thermometer or, well, your smartphone. the information is objective. It's based on data and observation. However, if I say it's very hot, now that's an opinion. 30 degrees Celsius is a fact. It's objective information that I can verify. But you may think 30 degrees Celsius is comfortable. Another person may say 30 degrees Celsius is really hot. Each person can have a different opinion. So facts are verifiable and objective. You can check the information and tell if it's true or untrue. Opinions cannot be verified and they're subjective. They change according to a person's judgment. It's a fact that it's 30 degrees Celsius, but each person may feel differently about that. When something's presented as a fact, does it also mean it's true? Well, these are separate issues. In a passage, a writer can present information as a fact, even though it may be inaccurate or even flat out wrong. It's up to you as the reader to examine the information carefully to make sure it's relevant and accurate. Let's look at this chart. It shows the average course grades that students received in a course. Half of the students took the course with Professor X, the other half took it with Professor B. You can see their average course grades here. We can make several statements based on this information. For example, Professor X's students earned an average course grade of 95. Professor B's students earned an average course grade of 85. These statements are presented as facts, and the information is accurate. I can check it right here in the graph. Professor X's students earned a higher average course grade than did Professor B's students. Again, I can check the information in the graph. It's presented as a fact. Students in Professor X's course earned a higher average course grade. Therefore, Professor X is a better instructor. Okay, now we get into a bit of a gray area. We saw that this is a fact, but saying Professor X is a better instructor is an opinion. It is possible Professor X did a better job, but it's also possible that Professor B did a good job too, but his students didn't do very well for some reason. This opinion is based on the fact that one group of students did better than the other, but it's still just an opinion. Professor X has more experience than Professor B. In addition, Professor X's students did better in the course. Therefore, Professor X is a better instructor than Professor B. Now, this is presented as a fact. I trust it's true, but I can also verify it by looking at the instructor's professional records. We also have a fact here. His students did do better. We can see that in the graph. But this conclusion that he's a better instructor is still an opinion. It's a little stronger now because it's based on two pieces of evidence, but it's still an opinion. So back to where we started. If I say the Earth is flat, is that a fact or an opinion? Well, the information is presented as a fact. You can verify it, and you'll find that it's wrong. So when information is presented as a fact, it is verifiable and objective based on statistics, data, observations. It could be right, wrong, or misleading. It's up to you to verify the evidence. When the information is presented as an opinion, you cannot verify it. An opinion may be based on facts, but it's subjective. It's based on feelings or judgments. Does that mean opinions are bad? Not necessarily. Opinions are weak when they're based only on a guess or your personal feeling or judgment. The more factual information you base your opinions on, the stronger they are, and the more compelled you are to agree with them. Both facts and opinions are important parts of sharing knowledge and ideas. In a study, researchers found that 2/3 of college seniors failed a high school grammar test. This points to the poor state of higher education in the United States. Let's see. This is presented as a fact. I trust that there was a study and this is what they found. This is problematic. It's just an opinion. Yes, you can judge the quality of higher education based on whatever you want, but others may disagree that this information is a good measure of quality. I can read the study to verify what these researchers found, but I cannot verify that the quality of education is high or low based on it. An opinion based on fact is still an opinion. Is it a strong opinion? Let's see, the study found that these college seniors failed some high school grammar test. What was the test like? Can a grammar test be used to judge the quality of higher education? I'm not so sure about that. Is there a better way to measure quality? This is a somewhat weak opinion because the evidence doesn't support it very well at all. So the point is that an opinion based on facts is stronger than one that's based on just feelings or personal judgment. But you must still ask questions about those facts. Don't simply agree with someone's opinion as if it were factual.
When we're researching a subject, we want to make sure we find factual information. Facts are objective. They don't change depending on who is talking or how someone sees the subject. They are verifiable. You can prove that gravity is a fact by knocking a glass off of a table to verify that it will fall down. Good facts are also reproducible. That means that every time you knock a glass off of a table, it will fall down. You can do it over and over again and produce the same results, a pile of broken glass. Facts can be inaccurate or wrong, but we can try to reproduce the action and observe the result to see if it is correct or incorrect. Opinions are subjective. They're based on someone's judgment of a situation. They're also variable. Different people may make different judgments about a situation. They also cannot be verified. One person might like ice cream, and another person can find it disgusting. There's no way to prove either of these opinions are wrong. It's our job to take the facts that we learn and make judgments about them. Like a pile of building blocks, we take the facts available to us and put them together in a way that we think is beneficial and accurate. We want to make sure that our opinions are based on solid facts. This will make our conclusions accurate and useful. So now we realize that everything we research is affected by bias and prejudice, both our own personal bias and the bias of the researchers who present the information. We also realize that we need to base our opinions on verifiable facts, not just the opinions of other people. When we fire up a search engine and open 10 pages of cold, hard, factual information, we can now make solid conclusions based on this information, right? Not necessarily. Although the information may be factual, there are other things we need to consider to make sure that we're using the information correctly and accurately. Scientific studies are often used to prove a conclusion. These studies are usually thoroughly researched according to strict rules. They have verified results and can show evidence to back up their claims. But we need to be careful when we use this information. We need to make sure the information is used in the right context and that our conclusions are accurate. Let's see some things we need to take into consideration when evaluating scientific studies.
Studies have shown that taking vitamins is good for your health and bad for your health. That newly discovered herb can improve your memory or destroy your liver. Headlines proclaim a promising new cancer treatment and never mention it again. On a daily basis, we are bombarded with attention-grabbing news backed up by scientific studies. But what are these studies? How are they performed? And how do we know whether they're reliable? When it comes to dietary or medical information, the first thing to remember is that while studies on animals or individual cells can point the way towards further research, the only way to know how something will affect humans is through a study involving human subjects. And when it comes to human studies, the scientific gold standard is the randomized clinical trial, or RCT. The key to RCTs is that the subjects are randomly assigned to their study groups. They are often blinded to make them more rigorous. This process attempts to ensure that the only difference between the groups is the one the researchers are attempting to study. For example, when testing a new headache medication, a large pool of people with headaches would be randomly divided into two groups, one receiving the medication and another receiving a placebo. With proper randomization, the only significant overall difference between the two groups will be whether or not they received the medication, rather than other differences that could affect results. Randomized clinical trials are incredible tools, and in fact, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration often requires at least 2 to be conducted before a new drug can be marketed. But the problem is that an RCT is not possible in many cases, either because it's not practical or would require too many volunteers. In such cases, scientists use an epidemiological study, which simply observes people going about their usual behavior, rather than randomly assigning active participants to control and variable groups. Let's say we wanted to study whether an herbal ingredient on the market causes nausea. Rather than deliberately giving people something that might make them nauseated, we would find those who already take the ingredient in their everyday lives. This group is called the cohort. We would also need a comparison group of people who do not have exposure to the ingredient, and we would then compare statistics. If the rate of nausea is higher in the herbal cohort, it suggests an association between the herbal supplement and nausea. Epidemiological studies are great tools to study the health effects of almost anything, without directly interfering in people's lives or assigning them to potentially dangerous exposures. So why can't we rely on these studies to establish causal relationships between substances and their effects on health? The problem is that even the best conducted epidemiological studies have inherent flaws, precisely because the test subjects are not randomly assigned to their groups. For example, if the cohort in our herbal study consisted of people who took the supplement for health reasons, they may have already had higher rates of nausea than the other people in the sample. Or the cohort group could have been composed of people who shop at health food stores and have different diets or better access to healthcare. These factors that can affect results in addition to the factor being studied are known as confounding variables. These two major pitfalls, combined with more general dangers, such as conflicts of interest or selective use of data, can make the findings of any particular epidemiological study suspect, and a good study must go out of its way to prove that its authors have taken steps to eliminate these types of errors. But even when this has been done, the very nature of epidemiological studies, which examine differences between pre-existing groups rather than deliberately inducing changes within the same individuals, means that a single study can only demonstrate a correlation between a substance and a health outcome, rather than a true cause and effect relationship. At the end of the day, epidemiological studies have served as excellent guides to public health, alerting us to critical health hazards such as smoking, asbestos, lead, and many more. But these were demonstrated through multiple, well-conducted epidemiological studies, all pointing in the same direction. So the next time you see a headline about a new miracle cure or the terrible danger posed by an everyday substance, try to learn more about the original study and the limitations inherent in any epidemiological study or clinical trial before jumping to conclusions.
Scientific studies have been used to advance knowledge and improve health. But what we've learned is that we need to take into account their limitations before accepting their conclusions. Random clinical trials are the gold standard, but they're very hard to put together. Even when random clinical trials have been performed, we need to know how many subjects have been tested. A trial that shows a new pain medication is effective on 90% of those people who take it means more when you learn that it was tested on 2,000 people than when it does if it was tested on 10 people. And epidemiological studies are valuable, but all the factors need to be considered. What group was used in the study? What was their age range, relative health, family background, genetic makeup, and culture? A study that shows that all its participants lived longer when they took a certain herb means less if you find out that all the people were tested in their 20s. What about statistics? These are based on hard data and guaranteed by math. They have to be accurate and trustworthy, right? Let's see some things that we need to be careful of when using statistics.
Statistics are persuasive. So much so that people, organizations, and whole countries base some of their most important decisions on organized data. But there's a problem with that. Any set of statistics might have something lurking inside it, something that can turn the results completely upside down. For example, imagine you need to choose between 2 hospitals for an elderly relative's surgery. Out of each hospital's last 1,000 patients, 900 survived at Hospital A, while only 800 survived at Hospital B. So it looks like Hospital A is the better choice. But before you make your decision, remember that not all patients arrive at the hospital with the same level of health. And if we divide each hospital's last 1,000 patients into those who arrived in good health and those who arrived in poor health, the picture starts to look very different. Hospital A had only 100 patients who arrived in poor health, of which 30 survived. But Hospital B had 400, and they were able to save 210. So Hospital B is the better choice for patients who arrive at hospital in poor health, with a survival rate of 52.5%. And what if your relative's health is good when she arrives at the hospital? Strangely enough, Hospital B is still the better choice, with a survival rate of over 98%. So how can Hospital A have a better overall survival rate if Hospital B has better survival rates for patients in each of the two groups? What we've stumbled upon is a case of Simpsons Paradox, where the same set of data can appear to show opposite trends depending on how it's grouped. This often occurs when aggregated data hides a conditional variable, sometimes known as a lurking variable, which is a hidden additional factor that significantly influences results. Here, the hidden factor is the relative proportion of patients who arrive in good or poor health. Simpsons Paradox isn't just a hypothetical scenario. It pops up from time to time in the real world, sometimes in important contexts. One study in the UK appeared to show that smokers had a higher survival rate than non-smokers over a 20-year time period. That is, until dividing the participants by age group showed that the non-smokers were significantly older on average, and thus more likely to die during the trial period, precisely because they were living longer in general. Here, the age groups are the lurking variable and are vital to correctly interpret the data. In another example, an analysis of Florida's death penalty cases seemed to reveal no racial disparity in sentencing between black and white defendants convicted of murder. But dividing the cases by the race of the victim told a different story. In either situation, black defendants were more likely to be sentenced to death. The slightly higher overall sentencing rate for white defendants was due to the fact that cases with white victims were more likely to elicit a death sentence than cases where the victim was black, and most murders occurred between people of the same race. So how do we avoid falling for the paradox? Unfortunately, there is no one-size-fits-all answer. Data can be grouped and divided in any number of ways, and overall numbers may sometimes give a more accurate picture than data divided into misleading or arbitrary categories. All we can do is carefully study the actual situations the statistics describe and consider whether lurking variables may be present. Otherwise, we leave ourselves vulnerable to those who would use data to manipulate others and promote their own agendas.
How data is presented can affect its usefulness. Simpsons Paradox describes how grouping data in different ways can affect how it's interpreted. We also have to be aware of any conditional or lurking variables. These are hidden factors that affect the results. Only by taking these into account can we use the data correctly. Graphs can be very helpful. All the information is laid out for us, and we can easily check the numbers. Let's see what we need to think about when using graphs and charts.
A toothpaste brand claims their product will destroy more plaque than any product ever made. A politician tells you their plan will create the most jobs. We're so used to hearing these kinds of exaggerations in advertising and politics that we might not even bat an eye. But what about when the claim is accompanied by a graph? After all, a graph isn't an opinion. It represents cold, hard numbers, and who can argue with those? Yet, as it turns out, there are plenty of ways graphs can mislead and outright manipulate. Here are some things to look out for. In this 1992 ad, Chevy claimed to make the most reliable trucks in America using this graph. Not only does it show that 98% of all Chevy trucks sold in the last 10 years are still on the road, but it looks like they're twice as dependable as Toyota trucks. That is, until you take a closer look at the numbers on the left and see that the figure for Toyota is about 96.5%. The scale only goes between 95 and 100%. If it went from 0 to 100, it would look like this. This is one of the most common ways graphs misrepresent data, by distorting the scale. Zooming in on a small portion of the y-axis exaggerates a barely detectable difference between the things being compared. And it's especially misleading with bar graphs, since we assume the difference in the size of the bars is proportional to the values. But the scale can also be distorted along the x-axis, usually in line graphs showing something changing over time. This chart showing the rise in American unemployment from 2008 to 2010 manipulates the x-axis in two ways. First of all, the scale is inconsistent, compressing the 15-month span after March 2009 to look shorter than the preceding 6 months. Using more consistent data points gives a different picture, with job losses tapering off by the end of 2009. And if you wonder why they were increasing in the first place, the timeline starts immediately after the U.S.'s biggest financial collapse since the Great Depression. These techniques are known as cherry picking. A time range can be carefully chosen to exclude the impact of a major event right outside it. And picking specific data points can hide important changes in between. Even when there's nothing wrong with the graph itself, leaving out relevant data can give a misleading impression. This chart of how many people watch the Super Bowl each year makes it look like the event's popularity is exploding. But it's not accounting for population growth. The ratings have actually held steady because while the number of football fans has increased, their share of overall viewership has not. Finally, a graph can't tell you much if you don't know the full significance of what's being presented. Both of the following graphs use the same ocean temperature data from the National Centers for Environmental Information. So why do they seem to give opposite impressions? The first graph plots the average annual ocean temperature from 1880 to 2016, making the change look insignificant. But in fact, a rise of even half a degree Celsius can cause massive ecological disruption. This is why the second graph, which shows the average temperature variation each year, is far more significant. When they're used well, graphs can help us intuitively grasp complex data. But as visual software has enabled more usage of graphs throughout all media, it's also made them easier to use in a careless or dishonest way. So the next time you see a graph, don't be swayed by the lines and curves. Look at the labels, the numbers, the scale, and the context, and ask what story the picture is trying to tell.
Infographics are all the rage today, but we need to be aware of misleading tactics. Two tactics mentioned are distorting the scale of the graph or cherry-picking the data. This is done to emphasize desirable information and minimize contrary results. We want to take the time to analyze the labels, numbers, scale, and context of any graph or chart. There's been a lot of reports warning about the rise of social media and the fall of civilization. Social media has been blamed for many of society's problems, but it also has brought many benefits. It has brought instantaneous communication into the hands of individuals. This has allowed social injustices to be broadcast worldwide. It led to the Arab Spring in Egypt. It has also allowed police brutality, sexual harassment, and prejudice to be brought to public attention. Many companies use social media accounts to showcase their products and make announcements. Yet social media is a home for opinion, not fact. Let's look at some things we should consider when trying to evaluate truth in a social media post.
How Rumors on Social Media Affect Our Lives by Lauren Stanley. In our world today, digital media has become a part of an everyday lifestyle. This includes well-known sites such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and email, just to name a few. While these sites provide us entertainment, they can also be used as a tool of miscommunication, creating a rumor of false information in the media world. The majority of social media users are teenagers to young adults. This means the rumors that get created online have the probability of being created by the younger generation. In the commonly used social media platforms graph, there are several social medias that are listed. These are just a few that are commonly used. Rumors Rumors are created with a purpose, as author Nicholas D'Alfonso likes to put it. In his article, How and Why Rumors Work and How to Stop Them, he states that rumors serve on a personal and social level. He wrote in his article that there is a reason individuals find it necessary to start a rumor. He declares rumors are started not for the benefit of themselves, but to get to the bottom of the truth, figure out the facts, and to make sense about our world. Rumors are created in the media world with unverified information because of reasons such as uncertainty, anxiety, or someone's social status could be at stake. Other reasons behind creating a rumor could be for attention seeking, to hurt someone else with revenge, or to be able to feel superior and have power. In the Rumor Start Here graph, there are representations of 4 different social sites that have been proven to detect rumors on their site. Social media has done a great job of allowing individuals to post what they want and when they want. The downfall is, not everything that is posted has accuracy or credibility. As well as information, unreal pictures can be posted. For example, Photoshop photos can be posted online and make it hard to distinguish the truth. In the box below, it states how news spread online can be quickly exaggerated and could turn attention from a real problem or situation. Jesse Singal categorizes rumors as either a dread rumor or a wish rumor in the article How to Fight a Rumor. A dread rumor is something that someone fears could or will happen, and a wish rumor is something that a person starts wishing something good will happen. In her article, she states, if a rumor has a negative outcome, it will begin to spread faster than ones with a positive outcome. Rumors spread fast if the rumor is talking about someone high on the totem pole and any failures they might have. And the no comment policy is something which someone will use against the victim since they were not trying to deny the rumor. There are many ways that a rumor can be stopped in its tracks and prevented. Some ways that a scandal heard through the grapevine can be prevented is by not fighting back with fire. If someone doesn't join in or doesn't continue to add false information, it is helping end the situation quicker. A person needs to be upfront and honest and to communicate truthfully. Another main thing is to address the situation before it begins to circulate. In the Rumors of 2013 chart, there are examples that were created online and eventually spread across different websites. In conclusion, posting something of false information can be emotionally harmful to someone. Always remember this before posting something where the whole world can see. Rumors always have a purpose and reason behind it. If someone wants to seek attention or get revenge, they might create a rumor, hurting someone else in the process. If a rumor has a negative outcome, it will most likely start to spread faster, which makes the prevention more important. There are many ways to stop a rumor, especially by addressing the situation before it begins to circulate.
There's a purpose behind spreading false or untruthful information through social media. Negative rumors spread rapidly and gain a lot of attention for the person who initially reported it. So rumor mongers spread information that people dread, fear, or wish for. Everything posted on social media should be thoroughly tested for accuracy before using it as factual information. You may discover new information through a post, but be sure to verify the information from other sources before using it. The blind men in our initial story could develop an accurate picture of the elephant if they continue their research and combine their findings with the other men. By not relying on their own opinion or bias, and by checking with other sources, they can find the truth about the elephant. If we take into account our own personal bias and rely on facts, not opinions, check the context of the information we find, and verify the accuracy of that information with other sources, then we can benefit from the endless supply of information available to us today.